Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute to let people come on in. Michelle, can you make sure that we have the closed captioning enabled? Make sure we do that.
Sure thing.
Thank you. So welcome. If you're not singing Why Can't We Be Friends in your head yet, you might be by the end of the session. We're super excited to have the Reverend Carol Moorhead and Dr. Daniel Moorhead with us today. It looks like we've got some more people just entering, but I'm going to go ahead and start an introduction, and then I'll turn it on over. So thank you so much. I'm Kimberly Somariba. I co-coordinate the annual conference with Michelle Watson. And we're thrilled to be offering this workshop today. We have the Reverend Carol Moorhead. She's an Episcopal priest serving in the Boston area. She grew up in the Midwest, but has lived on both coasts, Texas, Europe, and New England. Over the years, Carol has been a passionate advocate for mental health and wellness, including being the co-founder of Pathways to Hope, which is a mental health conference in San Antonio. She loves to travel, adores the color red, often reads poetry, thinks in terms of big ideas, and hopes for deep connections and seeks to experience art in all its forms. Often, though, she finds herself curious about her world and wondering about what comes next. She's married with 3 sons and now a daughter-in-law. And Dr. Daniel Moorhead is a psychiatrist who speaks widely for mental health advocacy. He's the author of Science Over Stigma, which education and advocacy for mental health. He's a regular contributor to the Psychiatric Times. He's an award-winning teacher and a board certified in both general psychiatry and neuropsychiatry. He maintains interests in psychotherapy, neuroscience, and spirituality. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Kimberly. Hey, everybody. We are grateful to be here. Carol and I are grateful to have a chance to talk together as a team. And we love NAMI. We love the incredible work that NAMI has done in the 50 odd years of its existence. I think it's made as much change in our culture as probably any organization or any cause in the last 50 years. And although there's a long way to go, the progress is mind-blowing. And so we're grateful and excited to be a part of that and to be a part of that with you. Spirituality tells us that we're all connected. And so we like having this chance to be connected with you. We wish we were all together in person, but barring that, it's pretty great to be together in this way. So thank you for your time. Carol and I are obviously approaching mental health from 2 sides. Mine is more from the psychiatry side. I've been trained in the scientific tradition. Carol's is from the spirituality side with her training and experience as a minister and faith community leader. And so what we're going to say, as the title implies, that these things come together very beautifully in the way that many people experience every day. And so we realize we're not telling you a bunch of stuff you don't know. We're preaching to the choir, but we also think it's stimulating, inspiring to get together and remind each other of how beautifully these can go together and what a difference they can make. So I will share my screen for the obligatory PowerPoints and talk for 15 minutes or so, and then Carol will do the same, and then we'll leave time for discussion. So while I think most of us that are here probably feel like there is a kinship and a synergy between these 2 things, mental health on one side and spirituality on the other, it was not always this way. Many of us who have a few gray hairs can remember when these 2 sides were somewhat suspicious of each other. Or when sometimes, speaking for the mental health side, there were people in the mental health field in decades past who believed that you didn't or shouldn't need religion or spirituality once you got the benefits of science and mental health and psychotherapy and the like. And of course, there's a tradition of this dating back to Sigmund Freud, who was a a great psychiatrist and heavily influential. But one of his hangups was that he didn't like religion very much. And so he wrote a book called The Future of an Illusion, describing religion. Ironically, one of his friends was a Protestant pastor named Oscar Pfister. And Oscar Pfister wrote a book called The Illusion of a Future, because Freud said in his book, basically, I don't need religion. I have science, and science is going to make the world better and a good place. And that was Freud's vision of the future, was science would take us there, not spirituality. So Oscar Pfister wrote this thing called The Illusion of a Future, saying, well, you might not want to depend exclusively on science. And there were many who agreed with him. And one was Freud's protege, who later went out on his own, named Carl Jung. Carl Jung was descended from a long line of pastors in Switzerland. And while he himself was sort of vague on religion and something of an agnostic, he also believed that spirituality and faith and even God were parts of the human psyche that were more or less hardwired, that are just parts of who we are. And he had this sign above his doorway that said, "Bidden or unbidden, God will be present," in Latin, as you can see there. So he, unlike Freud, did recognize that faith and spirituality were things that were normal and healthy for human beings. Later on, mid-century America, Carl and William Menninger were incredibly influential psychiatrists, and I trained at a hospital they founded. They were not overtly Christian, but they were sympathetic to faith because their mother, Flo Menninger, in the middle of that picture, had a series of Bible studies that she had written herself and published, and these were famous nationwide. And so the Menninger boys were heavily influenced by their mother, Flo, and the importance of faith in her life. And she was such a dominant figure that the story is the Menningers had this very big psychiatric hospital that they had founded. William Menninger was on the cover of Time magazine. They were titans of American psychiatry. They spoke to presidents and senators. But whenever word came that their mother Flo was visiting them at their own Menninger clinic, they would hurriedly put out their cigarettes and hide the ashtrays and open the windows and fumigate the rooms, because their mother didn't know that they smoked and would not have approved. So lest I digress too much, I apologize for the busyness of this time, but the point of the, I apologize for the busyness of this slide, but the point of it is that traditionally psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers have been less religious than the general population. And as you can see from these recent polling numbers, that's still true. The general public overwhelmingly is interested in spirituality, confesses some kind of a belief in higher power, says that religion is somewhat or very important to them. It's less so among mental health treaters, but what you can see these days is that spirituality is still of high or moderate importance to the vast majority of mental health professionals like psychiatrists. And also, as you can see in the third point down there, 93% of psychiatrists say it is appropriate to ask about religion and spirituality and discuss these things. Farther down at the bottom, you can see among psychologists, 82% say that religion is beneficial for mental health. So these days of this big tension between mental health and psychiatry and psychology on one side and faith on the other are over. And that's a happy thing, because they have a lot to learn from each other and a lot to gain from each other. And there's a reason now why in general, mental health professionals like me are very sympathetic of and even supportive of people's spirituality and religion. And that reason is research. And so what this is a graph of studies on the subject of how religion and spirituality relate to health in general, as well as mental health. And what you can see is in the late 90s, this line started moving upwards. And it's moved up drastically in the last 2 decades, such that by now there's probably close to 2,000 studies a year published in legitimate, prominent scientific journals on this subject alone. So there's thousands and thousands of studies that have accumulated over time. And what they show is fundamentally, with some reservations, that when people are spiritually and religiously interested, that practicing those things is actually good for their health and specifically good for their mental health. So I'm just going to touch on that, a few aspects of that before Carol begins to talk about things from the spirituality and faith community side. So this is a list of very, very well substantiated health and mental health benefits that go with religious participation. People who are active in their faith community and say that they believe or practice their religion or spirituality, better outcomes in major depression, less suicide, less substance abuse, better overall well-being, greater resilience, greater ability to handle stress. There are some ways that there's a mixed picture, for instance, with anxiety. Some of you, like me, are waiting for more research to come out about spirituality and religion when people are dealing with things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, some of these severe chronic illnesses, and we don't have a full picture on that yet. But the picture we have so far is that religion and spirituality are actually powerful supports for people's health. And this is not meant to replace all the other things we can do for our health, exercise, good sleep, medicine when we need it, or talk therapy, but it does seem to augment it in a powerful way. The same is true with some spiritual disciplines that have begun to be studied. Meditation especially has been a big, big focus in mental health research. And as you probably have heard, there is a lot of good research piling up, hundreds and hundreds of studies suggesting that something like meditation is likely to be helpful for things like depression and anxiety and chronic pain, but also for our day-to-day functioning of our concentration, our problems with anger and irritability, our ability to enjoy positive emotions or be empathic with others. Meditation is powerful when people practice it on a regular basis. Prayer looks to be the same way, although I have to say a note of caution. There are not nearly as many studies on prayer, so we're not as sure about the ways that it may support mental and physical health, but the indications so far are completely in line with studies of meditation and studies of religious participation in general, which is that these things, if people want to do them and if people practice them regularly, these things are good for health, good for physical health, good for mental health. They're synergistic. They work well with other treatments and practices people do for their health. So why is this the case? Well, just to touch on the fact that the argument that's being made is not that people practice a religion and so they're miraculously made more healthy, right? We all are prone to getting sick, whether we're religious or not. We're all prone to dealing with mental illness, whether we're religious or not. I know I have. So it's not that there's some kind of guarantee of perfect health. The idea is that spiritualities and religions have these things built into them that are very good for health. All right, they help us make sense of life and give us meaning and purpose. And that actually is proven to be good for your health. They help us deal with suffering and reorient ourselves in a positive way. And that's good for our health. They offer us social support if we're part of groups or friendships or faith communities. Social support is a massive factor in health. And I don't want to belabor this, and you may have seen charts like this, but this is summarizing hundreds and hundreds of studies. And the bottom line is social support does more for your health long term, even than important things like taking your blood pressure medicine or exercising or cutting down on alcohol or tobacco use. Social support, which is built in to religion and spirituality, actually is looking like an even more powerful factor in your long-term health and well-being. So there's a lot packed into religious and spiritual life, probably more than most of us can take in, even when we're practicing them. Everything that has an upside or a positive side or a powerful side can have a downside. In the case of religion and spirituality, if people are in a state of deep struggle or distress, or even worried that they're cursed or rejected or condemned, this can actually be bad for their health. So there's some details from one very well done study about that subject. So we don't mean to portray in presenting this information that it can only be a positive experience for someone. Many people have felt hurt or disappointed or let down in their spiritual lives or in faith communities, and we have to be and want to be sensitive to that. So when we say these things are powerful for health, we're saying they can be powerful in a negative way as well as a positive way. And so, like with any medicine or talk therapy or treatment, we want to be mindful about how we do them. So how do we know how to do them in a way that's healthy? Well, that's a big question. But the general agreement right now, if you're coming at it like me from the mental health side, is it's not my job as a therapist or psychiatrist to look at someone's belief or spirituality or faith and say, well, this is right, but that's not right, or you need to change that belief. It's not even for me to really have to evaluate, well, does this belief have anything to do with the illness you're dealing with? As a mental health professional, I'm supposed to look at fruits, not roots, and not to judge someone else, but to think and talk together. Is this helping me? Is this bearing the kind of fruit that I want in terms of my health and my well-being and my sense of happiness and satisfaction of life? So that I'm off the hook, as I should be as a psychiatrist, that it's not for me to judge anybody else's religion. It's for me, as much as people want, to help people discuss and think about and reflect on how they want their spiritual lives to be a part of things, and if so, how that might benefit their health. So again, coming at it from a psychiatric point of view, it's not for me to decide whether religion or spirituality is right for somebody else or important to them. And none of these studies that we have, amongst all these thousands of studies, not one of them says we should force people to go to church or be in faith communities or be religious and spiritual. They all study people who are attracted to these things and want to do them. And so if somebody is attracted and wants to talk about it, that actually is relevant to their physical and mental health. And as a psychiatrist and mental health professional, I take it that way in a very positive way. And I think everybody in my field can and should do that. And then finally, I'm especially happy to hear if people feel some connection to a faith community or spiritual group of any kind, because those are the groups more than any other where you don't necessarily have to pay a bunch of money to be part of it. You don't have to pass a test. Most of these groups, you don't have to sign anything. You don't even have to believe exactly the same way, although sometimes that's an issue. Most of these groups, you can just show up. And although not every group is as welcoming as it should be, the idea of spiritual groups is that we're all in this together. We're all one on some level. And so if you want to be here, whether around the periphery or to participate more deeply, you're welcome. And there's not very many places as a psychiatrist that I can send somebody who is in need of that kind of social support and understanding and deep connection. So I'm very, very grateful for our faith communities and for people's interest in spirituality and people like my wife who help sustain it in our communities. So over to you, Carol.
Thank you, Dan. And thanks, everyone. So I'm going to share also, and I think there was a question about whether our slides would be made available. I think we're happy to make them available. We'll put them together into one thing. Is that right, Dan?
Yes, and you've got the speaker's viewpoint up there instead of just the slide.
All right. Well, let me change it. Let's see. Why is that? Okay, how's that?
It's dark. There it is. Perfect.
Okay, it wouldn't necessarily matter, but it just lets me see what the next slide is, and that's kind of nice sometimes. So just to kind of restate kind of who I am. So I am an Episcopal priest, in the Boston area, in Medford, Massachusetts. And so my specific perspective is from a Christian community, but I think the majority of what I'm going to say really is true for what I might call communities of practice. So it can include religious communities, spiritual practicing communities. Most of the major world religions would fall into a lot of these same kinds of things. So, so what in the world, let's see, got too many controls here. What does it mean to be a person of faith or of spiritual inclination when you're thinking about seeking help? So one of the very interesting truths is, and some studies say that up to about 70% of people, when they experience some kind of crisis in their life, whether it be a mental health crisis or a health crisis in general, or in the life of one of their loved ones, they will often first reach out to a spiritual leader, a priest, an imam, a rabbi, a shaman, someone, even if they're not part of a religious community, interestingly. So there's something pretty deep in our human experience that that invites us to consider the spiritual nature of what's going on in our life. And often what I find, and what other spiritual leaders that I'm in communication with, and from the studies that I've read and anecdotally, people of all different religious traditions are often really afraid to seek help. They're afraid of therapy in particular. And I think the reason for that is really because they're afraid that a therapist is going to challenge their faith, misunderstand their faith, judge them in a harsh way. And as Dan, I think, really said well, the therapists, treaters, doctors, mental health professionals really want to use every piece of who we are to kind of look at what are the pieces of our life that can help for healing, help us become whole. So starting with religious leaders, I think, is a really good place to start, as long as we remember the limitations of that. So one of the things I like to say is, when people, well, I don't say it quite like this. This is a little tongue in cheek, but I'll say to people, well, have you considered therapy? Because the reality is that therapy allows people, whether it's whatever kind of therapy it is, it can be short term, like behavioral or depth therapy, or analysis, or psychodynamic therapy. There's all different modalities for that. But it can really be a catalyst for moving ahead and figuring out some of these crisis moments. And of course, seeing a doctor also, because there may be the need for medications to deal with these things. And I always like to tell people I'm in therapy, and I have to tell you, people always are amazed that I'm so open about that. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I'm in therapy. I don't know how you can go through life without being in therapy. So I always say, do that, because through those kinds of relationships, I can be in conversation with people, but a therapeutic relationship can help untangle a lot of tangled things that are in us and help us see things more clearly, see ourselves more clearly. And as just a spiritual leader, we care about people. We want to help people, whether they're in our community of practice or coming from outside of that. We want to help. We want to see people get help. But we are also human, and we recognize all of our humanity. We are imperfect. And that means that we have limitations. And so we're limited in our time. We're certainly limited in what we can do, and we're limited in our expertise. So one of the things I think faith leaders can do, spiritual leaders can do, is to partner with the scientific side of things, because we aren't the experts in that. We are the experts in the kind of spiritual lens, but in order to be a whole person, you have to kind of think in a broader way. And so I always encourage people to do that. Another thing that I like to remind people is don't have bad theology, or perhaps philosophy, because not everyone is theistic. Often I find that this is one of the kind of detriments to people's understanding the relationship between science and spirituality, is they have these really kind of ideas in the spiritual realm or the theological realm, which are really not helpful. And so I say to people, don't have bad theology. Stop believing those things because they're really hurting you. So just like Buzz Lightyear tells Woody, bad theology everywhere. So what is an example of bad theology? Well, there's always a little kernel of truth in some of these that lead us to kind of believe them. So one example in the Christian world, and perhaps in some of the other major religions, is there's a kind of bad theology that says that sickness is due to sin, or sickness is due to some kind of imperfection or some kind of character flaw. And this is really in most religions that I can find, and certainly in the spiritual realm, this is really an unsupported kind of way of thinking about it. It's really a bad reading, I would say, and certainly in the Christian world, I would argue pretty strongly. That's like saying, if you just believed better, you wouldn't, get cancer, or you wouldn't, have diabetes. You just don't have enough faith. And I think people apply that to mental health. And we just think, oh gosh, if I would just pray better or talk to the right person, or if I was living my life in a different way, that I would be free from depression or anxiety. And, it's true that our faith might enhance our physical health. It may be a support to it, as I think Dan was talking about. It's a real fallacy to think that we're somehow bringing something on ourselves, because we live in an imperfect world, and a world where there is death and sickness and brokenness. And our religious traditions and our spiritual traditions help attest to the universality of those kinds of experiences. And trying to find the connections between our spiritual life and the scientific realm really help kind of eradicate this kind of thinking. Another bad theology is kind of that belief that God is like a genie, that if you just rub the lamp the right way, that God will grant your wishes. And if you're not getting your wishes, you must not be getting you're not rubbing the lamp the right way. Or it's kind of the cousin to that is God is like Santa Claus, that, gives us our good wish list if we're good, but gives us a lump of coal if we're naughty. And, when people have mental health challenges in themselves or someone they love, faith leaders don't believe that faith will take away suffering. And I think sometimes that thinking more in terms of how we can partner with the tools we have through science is really a better place to be than trying to think of how God will take away all these kinds of things. The other thing that I think faith leaders, we have a role in trying to say is, if you need medicine, take your medicine. Bad theology says that, if I were, doing something different, I wouldn't need my medicine. And I think we have to kind of stand and say, wait a minute. Another thing is, don't do it yourself. Too often people try to go it alone. I think this has to go with some of what Dan was saying with we kind of become overwhelmed with stressors, and having community around us gives us some insulation against feeling like we are totally alone. I'm going to talk about that just a little bit in a minute. So another thing that I think is a real important piece to think about, both from the science side and from the spirituality side, is reductionism. So when science and spirituality mix, we often try to reduce one or the other or both to the simplest of terms, because we want to try to make them mesh in some kind of way. But really, that's a mistake, because both science and spirituality are complex, and there's great beauty in that. And when we can see and appreciate the complexity of our spiritual lives, of our lives as humans, and all that science brings to it, it really helps us. So we're called really to dwell in the deep mystery. And this is where I think our spiritual lives can really ground us, because a deep spirituality recognizes the mystery in the world and have a sense of awe. I was just reading something this morning about how there's actually studies about awe, and what is awe, and how can science kind of attest to that experience as a human experience. And I like this quote from Francis Collins, who was the leader of the team that decoded the human genome. He said, "For me, the experience of sequencing the genome was both a stunning scientific achievement and an occasion of worship. I love how that sense of awe, that doesn't reduce either one to try to make it, easy, because neither one is really easy. It's much more complex than that. Self-care is really important. I think we sometimes in the religious world, in the spiritual world, think self-care, we confuse that with being self-centered. I think in particular, the Christian world does this. And here's where I think what Dan was talking about, there's some really beautiful studies that show that self-compassion, which is really important and scientifically proven, is also important from our spiritual kind of lens. And that can entail self-kindness, our common humanity, and mindfulness. I'm going through these really fast because I don't want to run out of time, but self-compassion is really an important piece, and it's a binding piece because it's important for that conversation between spirituality and science to work together, because both sides of that conversation really acknowledge and value self-compassion as being really important. I think it's really important to deal with reality. Sometimes our spiritual life, if we're really doing some depth work with our spiritual life, we acknowledge the reality that we are imperfect. And we accept and embrace that because it's transformative when we can start with where we are. And that's a place where we really join with science, this is the reality of human experience, is that there is imperfection, and we are called to embrace that and let that transform us. And through that process, we become more whole and more able to kind of show up in our lives. And I just, is this a quote from Friedrich Buechner, who is a Christian thinker. He has this great quote: "Here's the world, beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid, I'm with you." And I think that sense of having a community that's with you. So, and then finally, I think faith leaders really want to say, we will stand with you. If you are going to the doctor, if you are going through a health crisis, if you don't understand, we don't necessarily understand either, but we want to partner with you. We want to join with people in these communities of practices as we seek those connections with science, as we work together for wholeness and healing. And so finally, friends help friends face whatever comes. That's kind of deep acceptance of reality. And so science and faith can be the same way, and should be friends and should work together in our lives. So.
We said, Carol, that reminds me, and we're going into discussion time now. So please, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I think that's the most efficient way to ask them. I don't know if people can unmute and ask or not, but you've put me in mind, Carol, of one of the many things I forgot to say, but I think you expressed beautifully, and I feel this way too. You're somebody who's clergy. You have a church you get up in front of and lead every Sunday, every day of the week. I'm in the position of being the doctor. I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm supposed to know. But we're also in the position of people. We struggle. We have problems. I deal with mental illness in my own life. So we're not, when we're trying to fill a role of being someone's doctor or priest or clergy, we're doing the best we can to really fill that role and do a good job. But also behind the scenes, we're not thinking of ourselves as above it. And I really like the way you expressed that. And I can tell you from the mental health professional side, we're not in this as mental health professionals because we're above it. We're in the same thick of it, the same fight, the same struggles as everybody else, and we get sick and have problems too. So if that's the only thing that comes across from our little time here, I would be very, very happy with that. Yeah.
Good. Kimberly, are there some questions for us?
We do. Had a couple come in. Here's a good one. Has there been any discussion about assigning babies a therapist from birth? So they're just as they are like a pediatrician or a primary care provider. That I've never heard that question before, but I didn't know if you had.
In 30 years of psychiatry, I have not heard that question. It's an intriguing idea, because you're right. We give people a pediatrician from birth. I mean, literally from the first days of life. one challenge we have in mental health is, as you know, is that we do not have enough therapists and psychiatrists right now. We don't have enough nurses and nurse practitioners for the people that are desperately trying to get help. And I bet most of you have been in this situation of trying to get help or help somebody else find a mental health professional. So that would be the biggest obstacle right now. And so that's one thing that drew me back into the training of psychiatrists. Instead of just practicing psychiatry, I want to help make more. But we don't have enough, and that's also segue part of what makes NAMI so great in the peer-to-peer groups and family to family, is that the mental health professionals don't need to do everything. We all need to do it together in our different roles. So I like your idea. I think everybody benefits from therapy, but I'm pretty sure we're not in a place where we can afford it yet.
I just want to throw in, from the religious side, at least, I know in the Christian faith, I believe in the Jewish faith and Islam, there is actually, it's not a therapist, but there's a really strong belief in mentors from birth. And so in the Christian tradition, we baptize, many Christian traditions baptize infants. And part of that process is to identify godparents. And part of the role of godparents from a spiritual perspective is to be that wisdom person who accompanies them through their life and gives them another adult person in their life to kind of be their witness and be their champion and be their companion along life's way. And when that's done well and really works, it can be, it's not a therapist, but it can be a significant person in the life. And I think other traditions do similar kinds of things. So I just think that's interesting.
Okay. Another question that came in is, do you have any suggestions for ways to intentionally integrate spirituality or religion into someone's mental health treatment?
So I'll just say quickly, and Dan, if you don't mind, from the spirituality kind of side, I would say one way is just to accompany people. So as the minister, when someone's getting ready for some sort of medical procedure, or they're in the middle of, like I said, a medical crisis, or they're trying to seek support, it's very common for a minister, a rabbi, an imam to accompany those people literally. I mean, I've gone to many doctor's appointments to just kind of be the person in the room who hears things and can just be with someone to kind of help hold their anxiety. We go to hospitals, particularly with mental health. I think we are called on with some frequency to listen and help point the way to treatment and help identify. I mean, I keep a list of people to refer to because there's a constant need and there are never enough therapists and psychiatrists. So, Dan?
Yeah, I totally agree. Most hospitals have chaplains. I recently heard at McLean's, a psychiatric treatment center, they have one of their programs has to do with spirituality and practicing healthy spirituality. If you're a spiritual and religious person, then the most important thing is integrating it in our lives. But the person who asked the question probably got that from the talk and wondered how do we deal with it in treatment. I think in a therapy situation, if you're doing longer term therapy with somebody, every subject should be fair game, and the therapist you're not asking them to be an authority. You're not asking them to be your minister, but if spirituality and religion are part of your life or you're exploring things, it should be fair game to talk about that as part of your life. And what you should look for is not that your therapist knows everything about it, but that they're curious and they're sympathetic and they want to know what it's like for you specifically and what helps you or what doesn't help you or what your struggles are, or what you're exploring or interested in. They're a fellow traveler, rather than somebody who's a judge or supposed to tell you what to do. So I think we, how do we, you read books that are interesting that you find about the subject. You may talk to people. If you're in a church or faith community or spiritual group, you can talk to people. You may have other friends who share some of the same interests, and gradually you find your way. But again, a therapist who can't be empathetic with whatever your experience is maybe not the therapist for you. So I would give them a chance. It may take them a while to understand where you're coming from, but that should be a really good place to start.
Another thing, I've had people, and Dan, you may have had this too from your side, but I've had actually a number of people who have signed releases so that I could talk to their therapist, because they want me to be a part of the overall conversation, which is a very humbling kind of place, but that's another way that mental health and spirituality can join together, of course, only with permission, but
Yep. And that's the other take home for me, is that we all need all the help we can get. And so we need allies, and your spiritual life and, spiritual, counselors, or, your clergy and your group, those are allies with your mental health, and they're allies with your mental health professionals. And I know it's hard to get a psychiatrist on the phone to talk, or sometimes even a therapist. But if I get a call from some clergy person, I'm ecstatic that somebody has that much support in their life, and somebody who's that much on their side. And I think most clergy, there are always exceptions, but most clergy really want people to have good mental health care, and are so happy when they get it. And I talk to other clergy besides my wife. I'm very confident of this. They're very happy when people get their mental health care that they need.
And sometimes we don't understand, we have questions, and so it can be really helpful when we can say, how can I, as a faith leader, as a spiritual leader, support this person, because we're not doctors, we're not therapists, we may not understand all the mechanisms that are going on, and so those conversations can be really valuable.
This also reminds me, just interrupt if more questions come in, but that dilemma of, should I take this medicine? And especially as a person of faith, do I really need a medicine? You already addressed that, Carol. But I can say from my side as the doctor, it's always a struggle to figure out, okay, do I need a medicine here? And which medicine do I need, even apart from spirituality? But my attitude with faith and spirituality is we need all the help we can get. And so just like if there's a clergy person who can help, or somebody has a spiritual group or practice that can help, bring it on. I'm all for it. And in the same, and likewise, if there's a medicine that can help, great. I promise it will not be the magic pill. It won't fix everything. Don't worry. Spirituality still has to do its part, but a medicine can help do its part on a more physical level. And all these things, I think they work better in synergy than they do alone, even.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. I got two more.
Okay.
And you talked about, I think you touched on this already, but can a healthy set of values without a specific organized religion provide the same benefits?
Short answer from the literature is we don't know. But when they break these things out, like spirituality, as apart from organized religion, meaning, purpose, spiritual practices like meditation, the answer so far is yes. All those things help. And religion, great if it works for you, but even apart from organized religion, these things help for sure.
Yeah, and I wonder, this is really a question, Dan, and I use the phrase communities of practice. I think being connected, the connectedness is what seems to be the big important thing. And so
that's why that social support slide was in there. It's big.
If you have a sense of connection, if you have good values, but you're isolated, right, that can still leave you a kind of vulnerability that maybe you wouldn't have if you're in some kind of community practice. And again, it could be your yoga practice, or there's all kinds of spiritual practices that are not specifically religious or theistic. So
All right. Another one is a comment with a question. One reason for my breakdown was a lack of finding a spirituality that resounded for me. I was asking myself basic life questions such as, who am I? What is life? Do you think that this plays a factor in most people's mental health?
How long do we have to answer this question?
1 minute. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I'll be brief. I won't take a whole minute, but it's a profound question. And my answer to that question is yes. I mean, I think you put it very well. When we hit the wall with a life crisis, it calls everything into question, and we look at ourselves and open things up that maybe we haven't looked at in a long, long time. And the beauty of the question perspective of the person who articulated this is it's incredibly painful, anxiety provoking, and disturbing. These are our biggest opportunities for growth. I'm not going to grow in the middle of a crisis. You don't have to do your deepest therapy in the middle of a crisis, but coming out of a crisis, that's when we have our greatest growth. And a spirituality needs to support us in that. I agree.
I'll just say, a community, too often, and I can only speak specifically to Christian communities, the ones I know, too often Christian communities spend way too much time talking about things that are not about the core of what we need to be talking about as who we are as humans. We waste time on other things because I find people are starving to talk about who am I, what's my purpose, what is the purpose of life. These are actually really important things that's what we're supposed to be about, not about some other things which take up a lot of bandwidth in a lot of religious life, which I'd like to see change.
Well, thank you. And we'll be sure to share the slides from Dr. Moorhead and Reverend Carol in the Whova in the Whova app. We can share that as a document. So we'll make sure we share those with folks so that they can revisit and take a look as they see fit. I'm trying to advance to a thank you slide and it's not working.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you all so much.
Good to be together.
We'll have this recording available in Whova for 30 days, and then it will be shared on the NAMI New Hampshire YouTube page. So that's going to be there up next. And I'm going to try one more time. Let's see if I can get this. We have a workshop, or we have a NAMI New Hampshire Walks rally that starts right at noon with Brittany Porter, and she has a bunch of really cool stuff to give away. So if you pop over to that, you won't be sorry. So thank you, Dr. Dan and Reverend Carol. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kimberly.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care.